I think it'll end up in a place where the teams are closer together. And whether this is a product already of the partnership coming through, or it's just because of the time that was available to them, but that really strikes me. And I think as a result we're going to get better and closer racing. So I know I've already said that Team New Zealand have this advantage around formats, but I think elsewhere in it I'm a lot more optimistic about the competitive landscape we're in.
Hello and welcome to the Foil Podcast, episode 11. Thank you very much for joining us. Whether you're watching us, be aware that you can listen to this, and vice versa if you're listening. You can also watch it on YouTube and Spotify, but wherever you get your podcasts or however you're listening to us, we appreciate your company. We welcome your comments, your questions, your likes and your subscribes. So whatever platform you're on, remember, the handle is We Are The Foil, and all of the information that you need is on thefoil.com. That's an actual website. Andy Rice and Freddie Carr are here to discuss all things sail racing. Now, we're still 3 weeks away from Sail GP resuming after the Australasian leg on the Brazilian waters of Rio de Janeiro. But luckily, there is plenty going on, especially in Cagliari. We'll get to that. So what's been floating your boats this week, gentlemen?
Well, I'm just happy to be a little bit closer back to home. After my long couch surfing tour of Australasia, finally got back to the UK, but I am briefly up in Scotland, and then back home for a few days, and then off again to Palma, Mallorca for the Trofeo Princesa Sofia, the biggest Olympic event of the season. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Andy, give us numbers. How many people are going to be starting their Olympic campaigns at that event?
Well, I wouldn't say starting because we are halfway through the cycle. So maybe there are some that are starting here for 2032. But we are pretty much hitting the halfway point between Paris 2024 and LA 28. But having said that, Freddie, yes, you're right that there are some old hands, some medalists who were starting again. But we'll talk about that a little bit later, I think. Yeah.
Fair enough. And me, Neil, I'm down in Palma. I'm at the Dragon Gold Cup. I'm rather enjoying life in the slow lane. I must say, I've done 56 knots, and over the last 3 days, I've been struggling to make a Dragon do 6 knots against 70 of the world's best sailors, but from a different generation. I'd say the average age of a Dragon sailor is probably north of 60. And it's classic old school racing. It's one race a day. It's 2.5 mile windward lewards, which you do 3 times. And the races last between 2.5 and 3 hours. So I'm chewing a lot of caffeine gum because I am of a younger generation that is addicted to social media and have a short attention span. But I am absolutely loving this, dipping my toe into an old fashioned style of boat, which has stood the test of time, racing these old school legends. And it's brilliant. It's very refreshing change of pace from TP52s and mini maxis, and then watching foiling boats evolved. So yes, thank you very much for having me down here because it's a beauty of a regatta.
And what kind of conditions have you got? What's it been like?
It's super light, actually. It's the Gold Cup, as I said. So it's the kind of unofficial worlds in the Dragon class. It's a healthy class, I can tell you that, from all around Europe. And we haven't seen above 10 knots. So getting this 2-ton boat up and rumbling off a pretty big start line, and then choosing which side of Palma Bay you want to go. Now, bearing in mind that it's a 2.5 mile beat. So if one boat goes left, one boat goes right, you've got pretty much a 2 mile split across the course. So a half a knot of pressure difference either side, or a 5-degree shift, can mean hundreds of meters gains or loss each way. Going up the middle has been hard. And it like I said, it's a part of my brain I've not engaged tactically for a number of years, and it is brilliant. And it just comes back to remind me what a wonderful sport we live in, where we're not pinging off boundaries and doing 50 knots. This is equally as beautiful. And the Dragon class is going from strength to strength. If we look at what they've got going on in the UK this year, they've got close to over 30 boats, close to 40 boats coming to the Cows 200 regatta, the 200th year of Cows Week racing that we're going to talk about the closer we get to it. They're then going into the Edinburgh Cup, one of the oldest trophies in sailing, in national sailing in Britain. And then they go into the Marblehead regatta. So there's going to be a lot of dragons on the south coast of the UK, and I'm here for it. I love going 6 knots. I love having a bit of port and cheese after racing, and I love telling a few stories to those guys about the America's Cup because I love the sound of my own voice.
Any port in a storm, mate. Any port in
Yes,
a storm.
yes.
So Andy, and you're going to be there next week. So are you going to be in the same, on the same island at the same time, or are you leaving for?
I hope not.
That's nice, isn't it? I think we might even overlap, but we're going to be in different bays, but pretty much the same bit of Palma. But Freddie's going to be poncing about in his TP52 with his posh people in keel boats, and I'll be down with the kids in the Olympic scene.
Not posh people, Andy. Successful individuals who love the sport of sailing and love racing in Grand Prix circuits. Yeah, I'm down again next week, Neil. As the Grand Prix circuits in Europe fire up. So Gladiator, the TP I race on, is doing its first training camp of the season, where we're looking at all the new sails and looking at all the data and sharpening our skills again. And then with Jolt, the Mini Maxi, the Admirals Cup winners. So I've got a busy summer, man, and I feel so lucky. Yeah, and beyond that, I look at the team that I was with and the group that I was with, the M32s. We chucked those guys some flowers a couple of pods ago. That circuit is still outstanding, and that was my focus regatta this weekend that I looked at. And it was their third regatta. Yes, that's right, third regatta of their Winter Series in Miami. And it was a tricky one for them. There was basically storm sails all over Miami all weekend, and you normally get 15 to 18 races in. And it wasn't so much the wind conditions, but as you can imagine, in that part of the world, pretty tropical. The lightning strikes were coming down in Biscayne Bay. They only managed to get 5 races in. And it was won over those 5 races by Rated X with Charlie Julian. Second place, Youngblood, his brother, Miles Julian. And then in third place was Surge, the world champion, with Ryan McKillen on board. Now, Bobby Julian, the dad, sails on Dingbat in 6th. And I tell you, it's a pretty special group, that the Julian family. Obviously, Bobby is a successful man, and he goes racing against his sons in these M32s. And again, brilliant racing. Other end of the spectrum away from Dragon racing. Fantastic circuit. They've got one more event to go. And I believe there's only about 6 points separating the top 3. So in April, we will actually do a proper deep dive into that and dissect the characters who are at the front of that fleet.
Lovely. Now, obviously, we're also very excited and keeping an eye very closely on everything that's happening in the build-up to the America's Cup. And someone who many of our listeners and viewers will be very aware of, who is an expert and, with all due respect, a proper nerd about America's Cup. And he's going to make his debut on this podcast of this parish. It is Tom Morris. And Freddie, you caught up with him earlier on today. Let's welcome Mozzy Sails.
And I tell you, this was always coming. As soon as an AC38 got on the water, you knew that Mozzy Sails was going to be thrust straight back into the centre of the channel. And that is exactly what has happened. As we know, Team New Zealand launched their AC75, version 3 of their AC75 last week. And I would argue the most excited man in world sailing, Mozzy. Hey, he has not stopped pinging our WhatsApp groups with his thoughts and his ideas and his theories. He's read the rules from back to front. Tom, how are you, bud? You are that excited, aren't you?
I am. It's always a pivotal moment in each cup cycle when the boats get on the water. And I know we've seen some AC40s trickle out, but really it's the 75, the race boats we're interested in. And seeing Taihoro splash, looking at some of the details that they've updated, just getting a feel for what this next cycle is going to be like. And I like the rules as well, so I've been taking a read through them, seeing where there may be gaps or where things might have tightened up from last time round as well.
Yeah, well, just to put our listeners in the picture, obviously Team New Zealand are sort of 12, 13 hours time difference from us. When I wake up in the morning to do the school run at about 7 o'clock, I have about 24 WhatsApp with pictures and a day report from Mozzy about what's going on in New Zealand. So it is absolutely brilliant, bud. From what you've seen so far, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? As we said in the last pod, it's been over 500 days since we've seen a 75 in the water. What has straight out the box grabbed your attention from what you've seen of version 3?
Well, some of our viewers may have seen my video around this foil mass change, or in fact, complete platform mass change. The boats have got lighter, but specifically the foil in its complete arm and wing has got lighter. And for me, this is a really positive change. One of the things I hated about the last rule was how we ended up with people strapping lead to these like highly engineered pieces of equipment just to kind of tick a box, which was really a legacy from the first time the AC75s rolled out, and they were designed to be self-righting. So, but that does have some interesting elements, in it's kind of opened up an opportunity for Team New Zealand, who had their like lead concentrated one place, to kind of rip that off and get testing, get some new hydrodynamic data for the new cycle to inform their foil wing design. So that's the first thing I noticed and had always been looking at. But there are other big changes on the boat. So the one that I think has been hitting the headlines more than the kind of weight change is obviously the loss of the cyclors, the human element there. This one I know is close to your heart, Freddie. So yeah, that one, it's interesting just seeing the way the cockpit's laid out. Obviously six individual cockpits, slightly smaller apertures as well, as you can see around the shrouds. They've come in tighter around the crew there. And interesting to see they've got their coach on the water in this guest spot each day. So that actually opens up a new element for kind of on the water coaching pretty consistently with each team. We have had one shot, which I was sharing with you, where we got a glimpse down into the cockpit at the screen, and hopefully we can share that on the pod. A little bit of time and effort is going to go into working out what all these numbers mean, but a mind-boggling amount of information being thrown at these sailors. And then the other change, which was pretty obvious straight away, was Team New Zealand putting on these pitot tubes. Something that
we had,
Ineos, now GB1 pioneered, and it's a water speed sensor. It takes the pressure on the end of the tube, on the end of the foil. A really sophisticated bit of data gathering. So yeah, that struck me. One thing I will say about this, I'll be interested to see, kind of how pivotal, how important they were, because I know you had them on both the LEQ12 and the 75. What I do notice from Team New Zealand, they're not always first with these new kind of techs and data acquisition, but they always tend to kind of like, I don't know, push beyond what previous teams have done. Like they were second, I think Ineos and then American Magic had the LiDAR sensors. Team New Zealand were a bit late to that, but then they stuck them out on these kind of big kind of boom arm to get a better advantage of the sail, potentially advantage of the sea. So looking what they do with these pitot tubes is interesting as well. So that's what's really stuck out for me.
Yeah, no, they're a group that are humble enough that when they recognise that someone's done a good thing and it could be helping them in a way, they are more than happy to go down that route. And those tubes you were talking about, Mozzy, we had them on our test boat and then on our 75. And when they worked, it was a really, really reliable way of measuring pressure and water speed over those tubes, and it gave you fantastic data. When they worked, they were brilliant. I would give them a 70% working ratio, but as you said in your video, the one horse race video, which was a lot of fun, and my goodness, we had a lot of comments that we'll dive into later. They're in a real spot right now where that data collection in and around the foils is huge. All of the focus has been on the deck layout because everyone can see that. But they're in a window right now that other teams aren't in. We're expecting Luna Rossa to launch soon, where the data collection in that foil world is going to drive their next. They're allowed to build 3 foils, aren't they, for the next AC? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
and
spot on.
you need to be collecting data as soon as possible. So they're in a sweet spot window right now before they send the boat up to Europe, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is, it's always the difficulty with Team New Zealand challenges is that logistic kind of like journey from New Zealand to Europe, whether they're hosting and doing regattas in the Northern Hemisphere or whether they're actually defending the Cup in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a hell of a way to get a boat, and that really cuts into their kind of time on the water. You've got a boat in a container for potentially two, maybe 3 months, including the pack up. And because this cup cycle is shorter, they're proportionally losing more time. So whilst they've got this advantage now, they've geared up early, got on the water, stripped the mass off and getting good data on this new boat. The other teams are going to be looking good towards the end of the year and kind of spring 27, when they're all kind of dancing around in Naples and Team New Zealand on the back of a container ship.
Yeah, that is a good point. It is a hurdle that they always have to overcome, and they always overcome it very well. Well, they certainly have in the last 3 cycles. Mozzy, we'll stick with the foils, and we'll stick with the your observations. You're one of the first people to pick up on the weight that people clunked onto the front of the foil arm. Certainly Luna Rossa and Team New Zealand did that last time round. We didn't at Ineos Britannia, now GB1. We had that weight in our bulb, and we enjoyed that point of difference against those teams. And I'd say our 2 most pivotal and successful days in the America's Cup was when the sea state was up and their bulbs got more involved in the sea state, slowing the boat down, where we were confident that we didn't have that hydrodynamic break in front of our foil arm. And we got the double win against Luna Rossa that set us up for the Louis Vuitton Cup win. And it was the only day that we took racers off Team New Zealand. So with that in mind, and with the rule change, you expect to see that completely disappearing in AC38?
That is a really interesting question. I expect it to be far reduced. However, there's 2 other things that's changed. The overall mass of the boat has changed, so you could end up with smaller wings again. So, and then if they're making the wings smaller, that may mean they need to put more mass up, or are able to put more mass up out the way on the leg. But yeah, I kind of looking at Naples as a venue as well, and you spoke about the sea state. I think that pushes it towards maybe more people putting a bit more weight at the top of the arm. But I think they've probably stripped enough weight out of the rule that we won't see the kind of clunky foil spikes that we saw of the previous cup, which I think would be, a welcome position for me. I've been quite clear. I don't like people strapping lead randomly to foils just out of the way. It's I know it was quite an interesting point of difference between the 2 boats in terms of how that was carried and the kind of conditions each boat was aimed for. And probably with Britannia, there was also the quite muscular bustle you had on the bottom, which they enabled you to kind of clip and run through waves. I think there was probably a race against both Luna Rossa and Team New Zealand where there was quite hard bashing through waves, and it just seemed to kind of like carry on a bit more. So there's more elements than just the foil spikes, but yeah.
And in general, in foil world, Mozzy, what do you think when people launch new foils? Let's say it will be a year from now, maybe a bit more from a year from now. I'm not asking you to rub your crystal ball and say exactly what the winning foil will look like, but how do you think it will look a little bit different from where we ended up in Barcelona 500 days ago?
Yeah, well, last time we saw a pretty good conversion between the challengers, but Team New Zealand still stuck out, not only for how they were positioning the mass in the wing box and on the foil arm, but also because they had, it wasn't quite forward sweep in the wing, but the quarter cord line is kind of almost flat, maybe slightly forward, whereas the other teams had like an even taper. Structurally, in theory, that's a lot harder to achieve, but maybe has some advantages in terms of the way the foil ventilates and draws down with kind of like the sideways flow along the foil. So yeah, that's a big question. Will other teams be able to match that? Will they want to match that? Is that the direction of travel? Then the other element we can see pretty well is the flap design. So I think both Ineos and Team New Zealand here had these continuous top surfaces to the foils, whereas some of the teams didn't.
I can tell you that, man. So hard to look after. Our shore crew every night were on those. So fair play to them.
Yeah, so I think that's a development. Will the other teams move towards them? I expect so. And then foil areas. This was a really interesting area. The first cup, Team New Zealand came out with foils which were far smaller than everyone else's. It was like a striking difference. You didn't really need to measure it to actually see it. This time round, they all came pretty close, and I think it was actually Ineos which had the smaller foil, but kind of within the kind of, my measurement. You probably know the numbers for real, actually, Freddie.
Well, we
Can
thought,
you say
off the top of my head, and I've had a few pints since then and done a lot of other sailing, but I think they were the smallest. We were the second smallest from memory, and we were the two of us were quite a step away in terms of surface area from the French, the Luna Rosses, the Alingis, the American Magics, I think, from memory. Yeah.
I think one of the interesting elements with Team New Zealand is they did have one foil which was smaller than all the others, which they brought out during the round robin. And then for the cup match, I think they raced with two identical foil wings, which were the slightly larger surface area. So it's interesting to see they must have got to the edge there and kind of like, oh, this is a bit too much. Maybe the sea state, think about taking off in those waves. That's going to be interesting. Are we getting to a plateau in how small we can go? But then the boats are getting lighter, so maybe people will take that gain as a foil area reduction as well.
I mean, it's the thing that stands out to me, Moz, is that, as I know with my old school hat on, when you move into a third generation and someone keeps setting the bar and other teams start congregating in that corner of the design box, I suspect there's no like low hanging fruit in foil world anymore. It's really going to be around refinement, and I think that you are where you have been measuring and remeasuring to see the smallest of differences. My suspicion is that it's going to be really hard to see the differences in area. We could see a little bit different in flat cambers still, but we'll see about that. But to park foils there, and we'll leave rudders for now until we've seen a few more sort of boats launch, I think. Let's move on to System World. And System World, the obvious thing in System World is the batteries. We'll talk about that. But you also flagged to me the Team New Zealand main sheet system, the Traveller, where the double skin main joins the back of the boat, and you think it's taken a step towards another team that raced in AC37.
Yeah, so I mean, it's actually quite interesting between the two last cups, because it felt like both Luna Rossa moved towards where Team New Zealand were, and Team New Zealand in a lot of regards moved to where Luna Rossa were in Auckland. And I think that's kind of continuing there. Team New Zealand are really neatening up that clue arrangement on the twin main sheet system, and that looks like it's got some extra coverings, a baseboard to it, and is just looking super neat on the attachment to sail. It's hard to really imagine improvements mechanically, physically in that system. But I think you're right to touch on another thing, automation, because I've done this video about the foil weight, and at the end of it I questioned the audience, where is this going to be a big thing? Is capturing data on the foils going to be the big thing, or is it going to be somewhere else? And actually, straight line, I felt the British team were pretty close, if not in some circumstances ahead of Team New Zealand. It was the manoeuvres and the automation in and out. So I'd love to know where you thought you were as a team, and what you think that means about the next cup. And
first of all, thank you for saying that. There'll be a lot of smiling British people hearing you say that. I felt like they could accelerate better than us, and be that off the line. I thought they held higher bottom speeds in the tacks in particular, and they accelerated from those bottom speeds better. So yes, that might be foil world, but the day that stands out to me that I took my biggest learning from in the last AC was, yes, we went and got back in the match by winning 2 races in the wavier conditions, and that was brilliant for us. And we were chins up there. We were like, yeah, New Zealand have got a little bit of an edge, but if it's wavy, yada, 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 or if we're on a shifty race course where there's some opportunities for Ben and Dylan to take, we'll take them, and we can take it to New Zealand. And we were a big believer in sporting momentum. So we pushed off the dock on day 4, and it was blowing off the city. It was probably 10 to 12, maybe a little bit more, 14 knots. And the conversations coming off the boat was striking, wasn't it? We on board the British boat, probably 70% of our chat was around controlling our boat in the shifty, gusty conditions. That the speed loop dominated our chat, and 30% was around shift and pressure. And I would say New Zealand were the other way around. And that was the day I had my suspicions their control system, be it what's under the bonnet and how they're controlling their foils and their sails, was a good step beyond the rest of the challenges. But that day hit it home. That boat looked so easy to sail on that day. And it was like Pete and Blair were on the wire of a 49er, just talking about wind shifts. And that's where I believe they had their biggest advantage in the last AC, and carry that over into this America's Cup. That's the biggest gulf between them and the challengers, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think that's why, despite, teams like GB1, we expect them to launch a bit later, actually having maybe a little bit less budget to distract themselves with kind of these techie projects, they could be laser focused on, right, let's solve this automation efficiency problem and, put all our eggs in one basket and go after that. The automation is super interesting because it's not just the automation, but it's the energy recovery on the other side. And I'm sure you didn't like to see watts go missing in the system when you're
but we did.
cranking out
That's the
those
reality.
pedals.
No, that's the reality, Moz, between system efficiency and kind of the way that they could. A classic example would be the Windward Mark Barraway, when you're going from 13, 14 tons of main sheet, you have to give the traveller down, but the main sheet down to about 8 tons, how quickly they could get back up to load for a downwind, which would be about 11, 12, was standout, which means that they have got a highly efficient system, but they were regenerating their eased oil, I think, in a way that the other teams weren't, which is super clever. Everyone was pushing down that route, but I think I have my suspicions, and this is not fact, that Team New Zealand were doing oil recovery, call it regeneration, better than anyone was. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure within the rule whether you're allowed to do that or whether they shut that loophole.
You are still allowed to do that, so they're pushing in that direction.
Wow.
I mean, in theory, if you are super efficient with your energy recovery, then the way a sailing race works, you pull your controls on as you round the leeward mark, where there's, the load is just coming into the sails. Then you ease them off just before the windward mark when they're super pressured up. And that kind of like energy pulling out the sail, if you harvest that with, with hydraulic fluid running back into an accumulator, you can effectively
go into like a
only
hydraulic
pay for friction.
Yeah, sorry, brother, to talk over you. I think it goes into like a hydraulic amplifier kind of thing that then makes it reusable, whether it goes into the accumulator or into another function. For sure, they are so far ahead in that world. But I assume everybody has figured that out, right? Like, surely these other 4 challengers have seen that and are spending a chunk of change on trying to shut that gap.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always easy. So there's the harvesting kind of element to it, and if you can get the energy out of that hydraulic fluid as it exits, goes through the exit valve, then great. But if you've not got a utility to put it to directly, and if your accumulator's already full, kind of sequencing all that where you're going to actually store that energy isn't necessarily an easy question to answer. The other side of it was the automation, where I thought they were ahead, and we saw in their dockouts when they cycled. I mean, all teams cycled through kind of like, set functions. What was noticeable when Team New Zealand cycled through their set functions is nothing ever moves in isolation. When the foil arms go up and down, the mast is rotating. When the mast is rotating, the twin main sheets are moving in sequence. So I think that's one thing. If you move things accurately and precisely to where they need to go, and then harvest energy on the backside, there's actually not too much energy that really needs to go into the system from the cyclors.
No, I agree. We called it linkages, the linkages across the system. and the positional feedback of the sails, the positional feedback of the foils. And I believe that was one of the biggest changes from AC. Well, obviously in AC36, when we had 11 sailors on board, people were running from one side to the other. I'm talking version 1 of the AC75 for people who don't know. We amazingly trimmed the jib with a winch and a rope. Who would have thought? I mean, very archaic of us. But one of the biggest steps between that cup and the cup we had in Barcelona was this kind of legitimizing this positional feedback world and being able to link those controls together. And I totally agree, Moz. I think their linkages, particularly in their aero world, because that's what we can see, obviously, was strong. Like we all had linkages under the water, sort of rudder rake and foil flap and this and that. That was pretty basic to get on top of. But the way they linked their aero stuff was fantastic. Now, I assume everyone was doing it. But I'm going to come back to the conversations I heard on board again, because I'm a boat handling guy and a communication guy. They never really talked about the overall sail plan. So whereas we did a little bit, we had people who owned the jib trim, people who owned the main trim. And my suspicion again is they had one person who kind of owned the overall sail plan, and the helmsman, as most boats did, had the roll control, be it the main traveller linked to the jib traveller on the wheel. And we're going to move into now sort of how you're divvying up those roles with 5. It was no secret in the last cup that we had sailing cyclors on board the boat that took on sailing tasks to free up our afterguard. Now, a lot of that was because, I've just said, our boat was slightly harder to control. Our linkages weren't potentially where New Zealand were. But I think in the last cup they potentially had a cyclor who was trimming the sails. Now, that even though they weren't working as hard as us because their systems were good, I think they had a cyclor that was hitting a trim to target button, basically sending the sails however often they wanted to the perfect trim. And the helmsman was doing the roll control with the traveller. So that would be pretty easy to then go and bring your 5th sailor on board. We know now the talented Jo Allais, and bring her into that loop. And actually they're at the point where they can make it more complicated to make the boat go faster, because it was so simple last time. Did you get the same vibe with how they were trimming?
I got a similar vibe, although I'm not as kind of sure on the cyclors element as you. I've not seen any
cyclors down, mate.
I know. Well, the reason I say that was it was always obvious on Ineos you had sailing cyclors, same with Luna Rossa, because when something happened, you were looking at things. You can see where people's eyes are going and what they're doing. You never got that indication. So maybe pressing the kind of trim to target button is what they're doing. The other thing that makes me think they weren't doing anything too kind of bold is that all their cyclors were basically principally athletes with no sailing background. They did have those people in the organisation, but they didn't use them in the cup match. They used their kind of pure kind of like aerobic athletes. Those are the only kind of questions. I also think the amount of automation you were allowed last time, you didn't necessarily need even someone to be doing the trim to target. Basically the break in the loop last time was kind of the wind speed. The data that came from the environment around you had like a 30-second delay on to use for anything else. So that really, so you couldn't be trimming to a wind speed, trim to target for wind speed. It'd have to be trimmed to target based on a load or a position. And I think maybe what they were doing was just using their sailors to look at the course and pre-predict what was going to happen to the wind, pressing up or down on the true wind speed. And maybe the cyclors were managing something else with the, whether it's, which accumulator hydraulic fluids going to or whatnot. I also, on that, the other kind of slight question mark in my head is Dan Bernasconi did an interview for the first Recon interview, and he talked about what Joe's going to be doing, but he did go back to saying, we've got sailors who are really good at looking up the course and predicting the wind, and we want to keep the sailors doing that. Now, obviously, he doesn't have to say the absolute truth in these recon interviews, but I don't know, part of me feels there is an element of truth to that. They're looking up the course. That is something the boat can't sense what's ahead of it.
Yeah.
So for me, that would make sense. But I don't know. You probably get the whispers through the Cyclaws Union, and probably seen some stuff that I've not seen.
No, I think we're both in the ballpark, to be honest, bud. And we arguably the Cyclaws have been booted off the boat. I won't go on about it again. Not that I'm bitter, but because again we didn't tell that story brilliantly. Imagine in the last cup if we all knew what all the Cyclaws were doing and had what they were trimming and all this and that. Let's be honest. By the time the racing started, each individual team hasn't really got enough time to react to what the other team's software is anyway, arguably, and control systems. So, yeah, so ACTV. Let's see a bit more of what these guys are up to when the racing starts. Moz, let's park the AC38. I know you could talk for hours on it, and you will talk for hours on it as throughout the months. What within the rule, like within the protocol, within the setups around the AC40s and that side of things gets you excited specifically about AC38? No test boats and no two-boat testing on the AC40 stood out to you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, first of all, I think this collection of rules, protocol, technical regulations, and the class rule are much fairer. There were quite a few areas. I say fairer, rules are always fair because people know what the rules are, but kind of much more even to the team's strengths this time round. Last time I saw a few areas where things I saw as advantages for particular teams, like the grinders and the use of the grinders and the free men on Ineos was kind of carved out with the move to Cyclaws. You had the introduction of AC40s and a blurred line with the test boats. And they, both Team New Zealand and American Magic jumped pretty early on using AC40s as two-boat testing. So there's a few areas where I thought there was obvious kind of like advantages for certain strategies. This time round, it is so much simpler, so much like squarer across the teams. And I think whilst it maybe there's less intrigue about what the development strategies are going to be this time, because they're forced to, using AC40s for, tactical training and 75s for boat development, I think it'll end up in a place where the teams are closer together. And, whether this is a product already of the partnership coming through, or it's just, because of the time that was available to them. But that really strikes me. And I think as a result, we're going to get better and closer racing. So I know I've already said that Team New Zealand have this advantage around formats, but I think elsewhere in it, I'm a lot more optimistic about, the competitive landscape we're in.
That's good. And you in broad brushstrokes, you feel Team New Zealand have, with the protocol, with the partnership, leveled the playing field with the competitors more than any time we've seen recently?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
And I think they feel they're ahead on the automation, and it'll be up to other teams to catch up on that, and probably a little bit on full design. But that's a pretty clear competitive run, and I think it's going to be an interesting competitive run. I think we're going to see closer racing as a result of it.
And do you think that with the Kiwis launching this week and potentially other teams not launching for, let's say, for argument's sake, for 6 months, that could be a deciding factor in upskilling new sailors and learning the battery side of things?
Maybe. I mean, you don't like the battery. I really don't like the battery. You were right before when you said it was a failure of the organisation to describe what was going on there. And the battery's just so boring because it's so predictable that everyone's going to get. There's no human element. There's no question mark hanging over the racing there. So I do think that's a downside. I don't think it's going to take people very long to work out what the battery is, because there's a formula for it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's just going to kind of work or not. So that is a big shame for the Cup, and I really hope it changes in future. And the people commenting on our channel, I'd say, 80% are saying, you want to see humans kind of powering the movement of the sails.
Yeah.
And I think that story just needs to be better told. So I don't think the battery is going to be that interesting at all. I think it's going to be something people pick up. I think the more interesting thing is this fifth person role
Yeah.
and how they deploy that kind of like, additional kind of mental space to process information on the boat. That's going to be interesting.
I totally agree. And I think that a lot of the challengers will utilize that fifth person, the female athlete, which is great, on the boat to probably shut the gap within systems world. And my suspicion is that New Zealand are so far ahead in systems world and controlling their boat that they could utilize that fifth person in the eighth dimension in another way. But we will see. And that is the magic of the America's Cup. Mozzy, a lot of questions coming in is in and around, like, we're not going to put a Debbie Downer on what you've just said. I totally agree. I think the Cup will be brilliant. Do you believe that we're heading down a route, as we said in last week's pod, we've gone from 17 crew to 11 crew to 8 crew and now down? I mean, you can sail these boats with 2 people. You could actually sail these boats with 1 helmsman, to be honest. Is that the way the sport's going? And do you see that as a downside or an upside?
It's a massive downside. And for me, sailing at its core is about amplifying human physicality to achieve something that you couldn't do with pure human power. But it's always about amplifying what a human can do. From the very early days of sailing is the first time humans as a species used a power source which weren't purely our own muscles. It was using levers to amplify what we could do.
Amen.
And that's what the sport's about. So adding battery and getting kind of like energy in from this kind of like chemical storage, I just kind of think is missing the point of what kind of makes this sport from a pure physics point of view so wondrous. So I think it is a direction the sport's going, but it's, in my opinion, is the wrong direction, and it's a failure on the storytelling. They could race it with no one on board, but what would who wants to see that? What's the point? I want to see humans wrestle with a machine to get 6,000 kilos of America's Cup yacht around the course. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah, I completely agree, bud. And I do a bit of 1 meter racing with my dad down on Emsworth Duck Pond. Now it is good fun. And if someone infringes you can give them a clip round the ear. I'd like to see that, actually. I'd like to see Dylan Fletcher and Pete Burling having a port and starboard on remote control yachts, having an incident and a punch up. I'll be there for that. But that's the only way I want to see humans off the boat. Let's make it full contact. Sorry, I digress, bud. And are you as excited as I am about fleet racing returning to the America's Cup? First time in 19 years on a boundaried race course with boats doing 40 knots. Yeah,
it's going to be super cool and hopefully safe.
Okay.
I think I'm not sure it's anything I ever contemplated happening with the 75s, but then we saw it done in the 40s and it worked, and they are similar platforms, albeit they don't have the weight behind them and the speed behind them. But it's going to be an awesome sight, and I think they'll probably go with the upwind starts, which I think makes it a little bit maybe a little bit safer. But yeah, I think the fleet racing always adds a new dimension. It is not completely, but it's pretty different skill as well.
Yep.
And getting to see athletes shine in those circumstances will be interesting.
Yep.
So I'm going back to it was Valencia, wasn't it, when we had some of the fleet racing.
That's right. And it comes into, I wrote about it in my column, comes into that. When do you show your new hardware to the rest of the world? How much do you push if it doesn't actually directly drive your result in the America's Cup? And we saw Ian Percy's plus 39 with a brand new rig go from like also rans to contenders in the fleet racing, was set up beautifully on the starboard ley line, and the Germans took their rig out, and that was the end of their America's Cup. So be that a warning to all America's Cup teams going into this fleet racing circus, but the circus will be amazing to watch. I have no doubt about that. Hey Moz, we got told by our editor that this had to be 20 minutes, and we've already waffled on for 35. So we're on the naughty step already. which means I can't ask you a lot of the questions that you had on the bottom of your one horse race video on YouTube. But what we will do is on the bottom of this video on YouTube, on our socials, please fire the questions in there. And next week on the pod, we'll have a specific section where you and I riff around the questions that come in, because I think we've probably opened up a whole new different train of thoughts for our followers on the foil. And we'll chuck a section in next week where we get to talk through those side of things. If you're happy with that, mate, if I can join you again next Wednesday evening, we'll get that done.
Absolutely. I'm always game for talking about boats, so count me in.
I love it, mate. And just a word to the wise, when Team New Zealand have a testing day, try and send your WhatsApps with all your review of the day, maybe after 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. I know that you love it, but my wife is lying in bed with my phone pinging, going, is that bloody Mozzy talking about sailing again? So there you go, mate. Take that on board.
That's fascinating stuff. And there's so much you didn't even get to, because I think you could talk for hours about that stuff. And as you said, we will cover a lot of your questions and comments in next week's podcast. So keep your questions and comments and thoughts about the America's Cup coming in. But Freddie, does he ever leave you alone? Have you basically got an AC stalker?
Yeah, a little bit, but I love it. Like, he knows the rule. He understands the differences of what could and does make the boat go fast and slow. And he's a busy man. He has a normal job, and that's why he's loved joining the foil, because it's allowed him to do his regular job and keep his passion for his YouTube channel, now joined with us, going. But because he's got his regular job, he wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and goes through all the recon videos and photos and pings me questions about this and that. And do you think they're doing this and that? And yeah, it's quite a way to wait. If Team New Zealand have a sailing day, I have a very odd start to my morning, but I'm here for it, Mozzy. His passion is unmatched, and that's why I love him. And he's such a valuable asset to us. He's a legend.
Yeah, we love him, and it was such a pleasure to get him on the pod for the first time. He'll be back, and we know, plenty of people watching and listening will be very pleased to see him joining this fold. Andy, tell us a little bit. There's been personnel news which you didn't get to. The French team's looking strong, but is there anything else generally about America's Cup that we can just give us some headlines?
Yeah, a lot of announcements coming out of France recently, and Lee McMillan, he's becoming, the British sailor's becoming an intrinsic part of high-end French sailing, both with SailGP and with America's Cup. He's really earned his stripes in a very short space of time, doing what he's done with SailGP before. Unfortunately, he was injured in that big crash with New Zealand and having to take some time out. But yeah, great to see that Lee is gainfully employed there with the French, as now are Diego Botin and Florian Trittel, the Spanish Olympic champions and SailGP champions from 2024. So a real strong squad building up there. And Freddie, one of your great mates, Ben Cornish, joining the British team there, and some familiar names rejoining the British team.
Yeah, Bled and Mon as well, who has re-signed. He's been with the team. Well, he's actually been the team for the last 3 cup cycles as a grinder. What a legend. All the best people start grinding. And then moved on to be a trimmer in 21 and a trimmer pilot in 24. And actually, he's been with BAR, the original squad, on the Extreme 40 as well, back when we were doing the Extreme 40s, probably in 2011. So he's been in and around that group for a long time. He's got the biggest brain in the world. He would gazump Mozzy sales, actually, for brain power. So a real nice hiring. But with the British team, and they've also announced Dylan Fletcher, like big surprise. No surprise whatsoever. That came out today. But the news actually on the British side.
That came out today?
Yeah, they did like a Instagram post saying Dylan Fletcher's signed for the Brit GB1 today. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it would have been awkward if they didn't sign him, wouldn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But obvious signing,
right.
Obvious signing. Yeah, social media for the clicks, as we all do. But the news around the British team, I think, is, Andy, you've mentioned it already, is 2 trimmer pilots that have left the team. And that is McMillan to the French and Ian Jensen, the Goobs, to the Kiwis. Now, what that does is it takes a chunk of IP with them, intellectual property. And that is almost more important than hiring the sailor's skill set. I would say that in this modern day of America's Cup is that Jensen Macmillan will join their new respective cup teams and take, I'm not talking about, they're not going to give them a laptop and go, here we go, because we've all kind of signed contracts that say you can't do that. But the intellectual property, what they've got stored in their noggins up top is very powerful. All the different ways that you can sail and trim and control these boats, the different styles, they'd actually, to be fair to Macmillan and Jensen, they would be able to talk around foil design. Like Macmillan was intrinsic in our foil group. He was our key sailor that was linked to our design group in the foil world. So his knowledge around America's Cup foils for a sailor, I'd argue, is second to none. Like, it's right up there. So he takes that whole chunk of knowledge and goes to the French with it. And Ian Jensen, although he didn't race on the boat last time round because of health issues within the family, you could strongly argue he would have done if he didn't have that unfortunate situation. But he then sat in this role alongside the sail coordinators. So I would say the same of Goober. What Team New Zealand have hired there is not only a world-class sailor, 49er Olympic gold medalist, fantastic sail GP sailor. We know his resume is fantastic. But they have hired a huge brain in terms of AC38 sail setup and sail control. Now, if I was another team that hasn't filled my roster yet, I would be having a little bit of a scramble around and a little bit of a rethink. I'm just talking about sailors here. I don't know how the designers have reshuffled. I need to get someone extracted out of another team. We know that Burling's at Luna Rossa. Josh Jr. is at Luna Rossa. If you're at a Lingy or GB1, I would be moving heaven and earth to hire someone from an opposing sailing team from AC37 to bring that IP over with them so you can learn off what they did last time round rather than guess.
All right, well, Freddie, what about American Magic? Because they're not in the cup game anymore. There's a boat up for grabs. Is anyone going to take their boat? And what about their guns for hire? I mean, what about Tom Slingsby? Tom Slingsby briefly mentioned to me in Sydney that he said he's turned down a couple of offers and at his stage of his career, he's only going to take the right option. And then what about Paul Goodison? So I'm really intrigued to see where that hardware and those humans go.
Yeah. So my hot take on the hardware is I suspect another challenge will be announced before the deadline.
Yeah.
I suspect, I have heard rumours of another challenge coming, and pretty strong rumours. I've actually heard rumours of two, and I'm not talking about Riptide Racing with Chris Paul trying to get his American dream off the ground. I'm talking about two other challenges. So watch this space. This is my hot take. I'm not going to talk any more about it because they're in delicate moments. In terms of the personnel, Andy, you're absolutely right. You look at Goodison and Slingsby, both Olympic gold medal winners in the laser. Fierce rivals, actually, aren't they? From 2008 and into 2012, both featuring Sail GP, were both they both sat at the top table in American Magic technical design lead meetings. So again, there's two very talented people there who would not only bring their sailing skill, but more importantly, bring the IP. They bring the intellectual property. If you are a team right now that hasn't nicked someone out of another team, I think you've got to do it. I think you've got to try and get a sailor from AC37 into your wheelhouse to fill your roster and to change the tone of the conversation to make you think about things in a different way.
I love it. It's like Cold War defections. So
If you
come
say
over,
so.
Come over the wall and give us all your secrets. But double agents. I love it. It's great.
And I'm a little bit surprised that you think that anybody from any other team, Freddie, would be able to teach Emirates Team New Zealand any new tricks. Although I have to say, obviously, the rate of gain and learning of Ineos Britannia was probably the greatest of all during Barcelona. It didn't start great. It finished really well, but still not good enough to take on Emirates Team New Zealand. So honestly, can Goobs really bring anything to the party to moving from Britain to New Zealand?
Yeah, I think they're humble enough to recognise that they're also in that group that don't know it all. I think the margins for gains will get smaller. Mozzy and I touched on it a little bit. Therefore, you are looking for those last few percent and just to have a different voice in the conversation. We know that Team New Zealand has lost two powerful voices with Burling and Josh Jr. leaving. I think it's a solid hire. And you actually look at their hardware. They have changed a few things on their boats that have, in hardware world, let's talk specifically around the main sheet system into the traveller system, double skin, mainstay, where they've taken a step, in my opinion, closer to Luna Rossa, as Mozzy and I talked about. So they are humble enough to recognise that they haven't got all of the answers, but intellectual property is king. I'm just talking about the sailors. I do not know how the design world has reshuffled, in all honesty. I'd say Team New Zealand have still got Dan Berlusconi calling the shots there. That guy has absolutely crushed every loophole in the last America's Cups. Basically, also in the America's Cup they didn't win, him and Nick Holroyd, the current GB1 designer, were the guys who got the whole world foiling. They found the loophole in the AC38 rule in San Francisco, where we all went foiling. So Berlusconi is still with New Zealand. Holroyd is with GB1. The two designers that have thrown the design ball further away than anyone can reach, really, in the last decade. But beyond those guys, I don't know how the designer reshuffle has stacked up, because I've been on people's websites and they're all a bit bare at the moment.
All right. Well, we will, of course, we'll keep you informed across thefoil.com and on We Are The Foil socials. And basically, every time Freddie gets a message from Mozzy in the middle of the night, something's going on, and we'll keep you updated. So let's park the AC for a moment. And Andy, tell us about Yandu.
Yeah, Yandu winning the JJ Giltinan Trophy on Sydney Harbour. JJ Giltinan being the unofficial 18-foot skiff world championship. And I spoke to Fang Warren, who was doing middle on the three-man skiff that won. And he and the frontman Louis Brake together have won the last three world titles. But the interesting thing is that on each of those occasions, they've sailed with a different skipper. So 2 years ago...
You could be on next year, Andy. You could be the
Freddie.
skipper and do the fourth. You do
I'm starting to dream. I'm getting the impression that whoever you stick on the back of one of these 18-foot skiffs, as long as you shut up and drive and just do what you're told to do, you might actually win. So
is that what you called him? You were pitching yourself to go drive next year, weren't you?
Please. It's like the opposite of the IP that you were talking about before. just we need a body on the back.
Yeah, bring the dunce on.
You just need some ballast on the back. But anyway, I'm hoping Herman Winning's not going to be watching this podcast, because he happens to be the winning driver from this year. So congratulations, Herman Winning, because you joined Mika Lane from 2 years ago. And you joined Tom Needham from last year. Tom Needham now being the reserve sailor for the Australian Sail GP team. But I love it, and I think you'll love this story, Freddie, because it goes to show that despite on the Wikipedia page, when you look at the roll call of who's won the JJ Giltinan over the last 100 years or so, however long it's been going, they only list the skipper. And actually what we're seeing is that the crew, the unmentioned, the soldiers at the front are possibly as important, maybe more important than the guy doing the steering. Yeah, so I love to see the fact that Fang Warren and Louis Brake have won 3 successive world titles. And anyway, fascinating conversation with Fang. He used to do 49er campaigning with Parko, our mate Luke Parkinson. He's very much part of that Aussie skiff scene, but he hasn't quite made the breakthrough. And he's definitely got the talent. I hear people say he's the guy, Fang Warren is the guy that should be in Sail GP that isn't. And there's an element of frustration for Fang that maybe there are just too many good Australian skiff sailors and there just aren't enough places on Sail GP boats. Anyway, Yeah,
This isn't a leady question or a judgy question. Is Fang a nickname, or is he actually called Fang? I don't mind if he
I
is. It's a cool name.
I think it's a nickname. I haven't actually found out what his real name is yet, but I suspect on his passport that there is a different name there.
Well, yeah, you'd think if his real name wasn't Fang, he'd have his real name on his passport. But yeah, I
I mean,
mean,
yeah,
we need to.
he's absolutely made for sailing at the sharp end of a skiff. If he really is called Fang. But anyway, I will try and find out more for you, Freddie. But anyway,
Could you?
well done to Fang Warren, Louis Brake, and of course we must mention the guy who was just holding the stick at the back, Herman winning the JJ.
If, by the way, if you're watching or listening to this and you know about Fang, let us know. It's something for you to get your teeth into. Very much like America's Cup, we're on that cusp, the fulcrum between events with the Olympics. We spoke last week about the whole Diego Bertin and Flo Trittle. Can they, what do they need to prioritize in this sort of triple crown of sailing? So what else can you tell us in the build up to the Olympics?
Yeah, well, let me just dive over to the 470 Europeans in Villamora, because that's one of the big events that has happened so far this season. And you would say that the defending champions from last year from Spain, Yuri Jamar and Marta Cardona, would have gone in as the favourites. And they were certainly having a good first part of the regatta and sailing well throughout. But coming on strong right at the end were Britain's Martin Wrigley and Bettine Harris, who sailed a really amazing couple of final days. And there's a bit more priority with a new scoring system that really rewarded the Brits coming on strong towards the end of the regatta. So well done to them, Wrigley and Harris winning the Europeans. And then the Italians, Giacomo Ferrari, Alessandro Dabini getting second. And then Jamar and Cardona from Spain getting third. Maybe slightly disappointing by their high standards, being the reigning European and world champions. But anyway, one ticked off in Villamora, Portugal. And then we're leading in to the really big one, the Trofeo Princesa Sofia in Palma, where I'm going to be, and Freddie's going to be the next bay along doing his TP52 training. But we know that Botin and Trittle aren't going to be there because they have put their 49er campaigning on ice, because now they're doing the America's Cup with France as well as keeping going with Sail GP for Spain. But the big announcement is that Ruggi Tita, last year's Sail GP helmsman for Italy, but no longer with the Italian team, bit more time on his hands, but still with Luna Rossa as one of the helmsmen there, has decided to get back on the horse, or get back on the cat anyway, with Caterina Banti, and they won the last two Olympic golds together. They thought they'd retired from NACRA sailing, but they're back, and that will be really frustrating for their training partners Gianluigi Ugolini and Maria Jubilee, who are absolutely world class,
and Gimson and Burnett from Great Britain.
That was the battle they had. Those young Italians had that final race battle in Sardinia, in Cagliari, last October, and I was there commentating on it, and it was absolutely down to the wire between the Brits and those young Italians. But now the Italians, even qualifying for the Games, is back in doubt because the reigning Olympic champions are back in the NACRA 17.
I tell you, Luna Rossa is blessed with some talented, fast foiling sailors at the moment, aren't they? That's an impressive
that's a really good point. I mean, they are going to be such a strong squad, and then you add what you said, Freddie, about bringing the IP and let alone his sailing skills. Someone like Pete Burling from Emirates Team New Zealand and Josh Junior. I'm wondering. I'm sure you've been thinking this yourself. Is that the magic ingredient that is finally going to tip the balance for Luna Rossa? Are they finally?
I love that, Andy. I love where you're going with this. I reckon we park this topic for let's say a month until we see all the teams come in, both junior and women's and senior team, and we'll have a good old yarn around the sailing squads. But it's beginning to fall into place, isn't it? And there's already some conversations in our editorial group who's the strongest team already. So we'll wait for the dust to settle. Andy, winding back to the Princess Sophia, the one I'm keeping my eye on next week and into the week after is the lasers with Mickey Bickett Beckett, sorry, always get that wrong. I'm not great with surnames. Going for the four-peat. He's won 3 in a row, which is absolutely ridiculous in such a, well, it is a one design class. It is so open. There's 25 blokes that can win a race on any given day. You could argue there's 15 characters that could win a regatta. So to win a huge regatta like that 3 years in a row and to be going for the 4th is phenomenal. So those of you who geek out on watching sailing results come in like I do, keep an eye, a really close eye on the laser stuff and see if Mickey can get it done for the 4th year.
I love that you still call them lasers, because I do too,
nowadays?
Freddie.
What are they called?
They're called ILCAs.
What does that stand for?
Oh, International Laser Class Association. It's the sexiest possible name.
A laser.
So I'm sticking with laser too. On the foil, we're sticking with the laser.
Yeah, too right.
Okay. Well, you guys are going to be very close to each other. We may, you may have an emotional reunion in Mallorca next week. But anything else for us to cover before we say goodbye for podcast episode 11?
That's all from me.
No, it's all from me. It's heating up, isn't it? There's more people sailing everywhere as we shift from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, and things are ramping up here. And we know all the talent from down under's coming up as well. So, yeah, time to start getting excited.
Yeah, plenty going on. Can't wait for it.
Superb. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Freddie. Thanks, Mozzy. And thanks to you for watching and listening. And of course, we welcome comments, questions, likes, subscribes. So please get in touch. And we promise next week we'll get around to answering some of your... I mean, you'll notice that our team do answer questions when you put them in the comments. We do our best to actually moderate them, but also we'll discuss some of your very good talking points in next week's podcast. That is a promise that I can't guarantee we will keep.
Yeah.
But thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next week on The Foil.